Councillor Bates.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations for having more foot patrols downtown. It's been noticeable. I know it can't be daily or for 24/7, but it has been noticeable and it has been commented on. And we really do appreciate that. Now, is our crime rate higher in specific areas of the city? What areas within the city that are pockets are at greater risk because of poverty, because of socioeconomic status, because of education or the lack thereof?
So we do look at our crime trends, and every week within the division, we have a crime trends meeting. And the crime trends meeting is largely driven by our crime analyst. And our crime analyst tells us where our pockets of crime are occurring at that particular time. And what we do at that point is we deploy our assets accordingly, whether it be a knock initiative, whether it be extra proactive patrols, whether we want to deploy DRPS or not in a particular area. And basically it's that identification of what the issue is at hand and how we're going to address it. So very similar with Project Rockaway, we identified that there was a group of individuals that were committing a large number of violent offenses. There are upwards of 20 different offenses. We recognized what was going on, and we put together an investigative team. We had the investigative team working on that for a period of time, and we were able to effect a number of arrests and drop our crime rate down significantly as a result.
Okay, that sounds good to me. It's always good to have those things there. So if there is an at-risk area, do you do anything more proactive? I understand that you have to investigate if there's crime, but is there more proactive work that you can do? I mean, I remember going to school and having Elmer the safety elephant. So is there something like that that you can help children understand? We know this is hard in your area, but we're here to help.
Absolutely. We have our school liaison officers that work very, very closely with a number of our schools. They have had a significant impact in the community, and I see Councillor Carter nodding his head. They really have brought together a lot of different people and a lot of different agencies. In fact, Jolene McNeil works with Durham Connect, and she's one of our school liaison officers as well. And they do an outstanding job on a daily basis just to make sure that the kids know that they have somebody that they can speak to. And if they have questions or comments, that they can come up and speak openly and honestly with the officers as well.
Thank you. That's so important.
Councillor Carter.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Selby, good to see you. Chief Inspector, great to see you. Deputy Chief, thank you very much for being here. There's a lot of questions about what you're doing for us. What do you need us to do for you?
Well, thank you for that. Actually, I think it's important, to Councillor McQuaid-England's questions and some of the other questions that have been here. I think it's, you're leaders within this community, and people will come to you and ask for just that advice, what they should do. It's important to us that we really get a true picture of what is happening within a community. And to the inspector's point about sexual assaults, it's one of the most underreported crimes there are. So when there is a change and people feel comfortable and they feel comfortable enough to come forward to the police service and report it, there is a change in numbers, and sometimes it's very dramatic, as we've seen. It's important, and for us, if the reported crime goes up, as long as we're actually dealing with the real picture of crime, I don't have a problem with that. I would rather that than our community stay silent and be victimized. So I think, one of the biggest things I can say to the leaders of this council is please provide that advice and encourage people to come forward to the police service and report those crimes. And this is I've known Oshawa. I've lived here most of my life, and it's a great community, and it's about that cohesion within the community that we look out for each other, and we report the crimes, and we encourage our people to stick together and work with the police.
If I could just give a couple words of encouragement, as one is the resource development officers, especially in some of our priority neighborhoods, do incredible work. They work with our community health centers. They work with the school board, Make a Difference program. They do an incredible job, and they have a really wonderful relationship. And I think that relationship with the police early on will make a significant difference as you move forward. Inspector, I'm just wondering, there was a discussion about a lot of stolen items, and I guess your crime analyst might be able to answer this, but is this related to some of the addiction issues that we're facing in our community at this particular time? Is it that easy to relate it?
Is it possibly a driver of some of the
Yeah.
property crimes? Potentially, sure.
Yeah.
There are other aspects that are involved. As a general rule, theft from motor vehicles, which is an area that has gone up this past year, that is a crime of opportunity, which can easily be put down by just locking your vehicle. And we are consistently putting out messages on social media reminding people to lock their vehicles to just take away that crime of opportunity. And if we have people that are willing to do that aspect of it, it's going to drop those crime rates down significantly.
It's amazing. I saw on a security camera on our property, they're very calm. They're not going to break any windows. They're just going to check the door, and they get in, and they close the door, and they go through your stuff, and they're gone in minutes. It's quite a craft that they have in our community, so I want to discourage them. I want to also say that I really appreciate the support of the opiate initiative that we have underway, and I know that Inspector Townley has been very, very helpful advocating to be able to dedicate some proceeds of crime to be able to support the program for an initiative in the area. So I don't want that missed, and I want to say thank you on that. The last point being is, and I think it's an important point that the community truly understands, what percentage of your calls that you are being called to on a daily basis relate to a mental health component when you get to those calls?
There's different estimates because, you know, we have direct calls, whether that involve mental health, whether they're suicide attempts, successful suicides, or some other call. Some of them are not quite as apparent. So there's definite estimates anywhere from 20 to 24% of police calls will involve some form of a mental health issue. Unfortunately, you know, and I would suggest that that's probably fairly accurate, because what we've seen as a police service, it's one of the fastest growing calls for service in any given year, how many mental health calls we're dealing with. The good thing so far this year is we're actually seeing suicide attempts and successful suicides trending down for a change, which is very good. But it is always a concern for us, and it's one of the things, and as we've mentioned, we have a very good partnership. We've just worked with Lake Ridge Health on. We are working with Ontario Shores, and we hope to enhance our mental health response program as we go forward.
I was going to say the relationship with your Ontario Shores goes
Very
quite far back. Yes. Over many years, and it's been a successful program. The other part of the component the public should be aware of is that your officers are trained and are having discussions not only about their own mental health, but dealing with mental health individuals in the field. Is that correct?
Yes. We as a police service are very progressive, and we're known for that across the province about how we deal with mental health within our service. And we have to have a healthy service and a healthy police department to go out and serve the community properly. So we are working with that, and of course our outward face, as I've already discussed, is with Lake Ridge Health and enhancing those partnerships in the community, along with the Durham Connect table, which is situated in, the main table is situated in South Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Selby and Inspector, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Sanders?
Yes, thank you for coming tonight. I'm just going to ask some questions. In regards to cameras and safety zones, it's proposed, it's not in effect yet, so I just want to know what's your position on these cameras and safety zones?
I think anything that can make our community safer, if the evidence is there to suggest it's going to make our community safer, I'm all for.
You can see by the stats.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the bottom line is we only have so many resources, and we have a number of different things that are pulling us in different directions. And although, and I have said this, traffic is our priority, and it has been, it continues to be in our business plan, and we work very hard at that priority. It's not the only thing we do. And, as Councillor McQuaid-England mentioned, we had another homicide last night. So we're constantly being pulled in different directions. So any time we can leverage technology, I'm always open to the idea of doing that. And we've had some discussions. We had some discussions at the regional level just recently after the regional presentation. And, in fact, I spoke to a regional person today in staff, and we're talking about where we're going to advance that, whether there's some discussions about some communities' red light cameras and others about the radar piece of it. So it does start with the communities asking for that. I can't ask for that specifically. What we do is if a community decides whether it's the regional level or it's the other municipal level, then we can look at how do we support that.
Okay. My next question is in regards to internet fraud and the CRA calling, because it's in every community that's out there. So I just want to know if you got messages or educational or how you're addressing that.
We are, Dave Selby, I have to give him credit, and his folks, we are constantly pushing out public service announcements about the fraud scams, whether it be we've had the phone calls to say that your grandson or granddaughter needs help. We've had the CRA scams. There seems to be another scam every other day, and we came to, in some cases, go back to the old, the old standbys, the phone calls again. So there's always somebody looking to scam people, and we had York Region, there was some discussion about some of the cards, the gift cards, those types of things, buying them. If anyone's asking you to do that, it's a fraud. The CRA is not going to do that. So we try to, through the public service announcements and getting that information out there, if we see it trending, even if it's not trending in our community yet, but we see it trending elsewhere, we try to get that information out there so our community is aware of that. We present, especially to our vulnerable communities, specifically our older citizens. We try to get out through our senior support group and make sure that those presentations are being made to seniors groups and making sure that information gets out there.
And I also want to echo Councillor Bates' comments in regards to the downtown having the foot patrols. I think the businesses in the downtown, they really appreciate seeing the officers there. And I know it's only manpower permitting because there's other things that are going on some days, so they can't be there every day, but just the presence alone is really important. Thank you.
Councillor Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Henry, and thank you for the information, the presentation today. My question is in regards to impaired driving. My wife's father and son were killed by an impaired driver, so it's near and dear to my heart. You see organizations like MAD increasing awareness, and every year we just see the numbers go up, and I just wondered if you could comment on some of the things we can do to, other than obviously messaging, but sometimes it just feels like we're banging our heads on the wall trying to prevent people from drinking and driving. Can you comment on some of the things that can be done to address this?
Well, there's a lot of thought out there. The education piece is a big piece. Generally what we find is the younger generation seems to be getting the message. So it's guys of my era, perhaps, that just don't seem to get the message. But we have to continue. I think it's a multifaceted approach. And with MAD and our ride programs, the enforcement piece of it, all the different approaches that we take, I think they have to work in concert. I know there's been some discussion, and I think it's been revisited since the discussion around impaired by drug and the potential of the concern over marijuana legalization coming. But whether or not a zero tolerance view as far as what alcohol, BAC should be in your system, as well as THC as we go forward. So there's a lot of different discussion around that because we have operated on the assumption, and policing has worked with over 80 milligrams or 80 milligrams is impaired. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of evidence, some medical evidence suggesting that even 50 milligrams may be impaired. So there's a lot of discussion going on about that right now. I think it really comes down to, I talked earlier about being a community and being cohesive. I think that probably the biggest impact is that people need to, if they see their friends are impaired or they've been drinking, tell them not to drive. get them the alternatives. You know, you've got Uber out there, you've got taxis, you've got public transit, you've got all these different options available to you. Certainly you don't want to end up in one of our vehicles. That is not the way to go.
Thank you.
Councillor Neal?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Chief, I might have missed it, but the crimes against persons, violent crimes up 1% to 1,586 incidents. And what's that caused by mainly? The increase in violent crimes? Violent incidents?
Sorry, Councillor Neal, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, it's violent crimes against persons on one of the slides. It
Right.
says violent crimes, violent incidents up 1% to 1,586 incidents.
So we saw a rise last year in terms of street-level robberies, in terms of assaults, threatening. Those types of offenses are the ones that drove that number up slightly. Now, I always keep in mind, too, that that's a 1% increase, keeping in mind that the population of Oshawa has increased significantly over the year.
Okay, which leads me to the other question, well, population increase in the north end, and I asked the chief at regional council about a police station in the north end, which Chief McCormick promised me years ago that there would be one. And now the 407, how does that, like the 407 impact, it's got to have some impact in regards to what's going on out there as well. And it's going all the way to 11535. Does the 407 have anything to do with having increased police presence in the north end as well?
Well, with respect to the 407, actually, what we found is depending on where it empties out, it can be a bit of an issue sometimes. But what it actually does is, with the 407 going east-west, since it opened up, what it actually has done is relieve some of the pressure off of the east-west roads and some of the other roads regionally. So that has been actually helpful in that respect. So people are taking that highway as opposed to some of our byways. So aside from that, what we are doing is that every so often, usually annually we look at it, but every 3 years at least, what we do is a full review, is to look at our boundaries and say, okay, how is our workload shifting, and how, you know, what's the impact of that? So we did a major review just in the last couple of years to say what will be the impact of the 407, the 412, and ultimately the 418, and tried to plan for that. The other thing that is unique is when you've got roadways like that, they actually they create an issue sometimes for response because you're limited on where you can cross over these areas. So we also look at that and how we respond and from what divisions. It's not that I'd ever rule out necessarily a division in North Oshawa, but what we do look at is how the demand grows, where it's going to grow more quickly. And the one thing that has been proven, its evidence, is that really bricks and mortar or physical presence doesn't necessarily deter crime. So it's a multifaceted approach. If what we get into is it because of the 407 or other boundaries or other barriers, I should use the word, if it becomes a bit of a problem as far as response to that, that's where we look to reallocate resources. But we have to have the resources to put in those buildings. So right now, what we are looking at is really where we are, the growth. So we have that northeast Oshawa, we have northwest Clarington, we have west Whitby. We're looking at Seaton and that up in Pickering area. We're looking at all those areas, and we'll adjust our 10-year capital plan based on what we're seeing. But at this stage of the game, I don't see a building in North Oshawa right now.
Okay, well, it needs to come soon, I know that, because it's just the population and the growth is tremendous. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Kerr?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and this will be a question this time. Thank you, Chief, for your presentation and your officers' presence here tonight. Just one question. Your penultimate slide mentioned, excuse me, Bill 175. And I just wondered if you could comment on what you see as the biggest issue or challenge that you foresee arising from that legislation if and when it becomes law.
Well, thank you, Councillor. I think the biggest thing right now is there's a lot of unknowns. Depending on who you talk to in the policing field, they'll have different opinions on it. One of the things is that with respect to the oversight and how discipline will be dealt with in the police department, one of the things currently right now in the legislation is it says the chief is responsible for maintaining discipline and good order in the police service. That actually is going to be removed from the act because we will no longer be responsible for maintaining discipline and good order in the police service. So I think there are some advantages to having, and I completely believe in civilian oversight and these oversight bodies for transparency and for objectivity. But on the other hand, I see that there's a potential that they're taking too much away from the police chief, and that it may be an issue of, how do I run the police service and maintain that? But again, I'll have to wait until the details are out. But there are a number of different things that are going to change. I think some of them, actually the vast majority of them I agree with. I think the ones that I'm a little bit concerned about, I need more details on to see where we're going to go with that. And that will come out ultimately in the regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member of council? Chief, I'd like to thank you and your command team for being here tonight. I also want to recognize Inspector Saliba and Staff Sergeant Melnick for the great effort they did helping us when Simcoe Street was closed. When you have to move tens of thousands of cars, buses, and people around and through a neighborhood that is really a residential neighborhood, the work that your team provided to our team was exceptional, and it made that challenge a little bit easier to deal with. And for what you do each and every day, thank you.
Thank you, Worship.
And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the evening, or you can take your leave.
My wife is expecting me at home, but thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome. Members of council will just take a second so that they can exit. So, members of council, I want to advise you at this time that Leroy Clark has withdrawn his request to speak this evening. Delegation requests require 2/3. There are none. Correspondence requests, item 1. The